This 84-year-old woman could no longer live in her cabin because her children decided to put her in a nursing home. So, she wanted to donate her simple house to a homeless person who always helped her, but her children stopped her. When the homeless man managed to get inside the cabin, what he found inside made his jaw drop. Since the death of her husband, Maggie had lived in a cabin alone in Texas. She had been able to take care of herself all her life, but now it was getting harder and harder. At the height of her 84 years, she was still trying to keep the place clean and well maintained, but her strength and health were no longer the same as before. When the phone rang, on the other end of the line was her oldest son, once again insisting that it was time for her to agree to stay in a nursing home. There, she would have health professionals to treat her, activities to pass the time, and other people to interact with. Maggie listened to all the arguments and finally decided that it was okay, she could live in a nursing home. But he wanted to know what they intended to do with her cabin and the small piece of land around it, a space she had cared for with great care for practically all her life. Her oldest son suggested they could sell the place and the money could all go to Maggie. The youngest son suggested renovating and renting the place, generating a monthly income for the family. Maggie again listened very carefully to the ideas, but she was sure she had a better solution, donating the cabin as it was to Denver, a nearby homeless person. Denver had always been a good man to Maggie and she wanted to help him in some way. Her kids didn't like the idea at all and didn't even trust Denver, but in consideration of Maggie's age, they said they would see what was possible. What neither Denver nor her family knew is that Maggie would leave something far more valuable in the cabin than the house itself. Denver was already 60 years old. He lost his wife a decade ago. As a result of this grief, he developed a depression that greatly hindered his life. It was on the streets that Denver and Maggie met 3 years ago. Maggie was returning from the market, carrying several bags. Suddenly, one of the bags burst and the fruit rolled down the street. Realizing that it was an elderly woman, Denver hurried and collected all the fruit, as well as getting another bag for the lady from a store next door. After that, Denver excused himself and took the rest of the bags the old woman was holding and said, "You can leave it to me. I take everything to you." Denver had no idea that this encounter would change his life forever. Since then, Denver has been helping Maggie constantly when she went shopping or when the cabin needed minor repairs. Even with much insistence on the part of the lady, Denver never accepted any amount of money as payment. He noticed that the lady lived totally alone and without luxuries, and was just extremely grateful whenever she received a piece of cake accompanied by a coffee, made by the magical hands of Mrs. Maggie, as he said. Over the years, the two loners became friends, and the old woman even invited him to her house for dinner. They respected each other, and Denver listened attentively to all of the lady's advice. Maggie could even see that his depression symptoms had eased. For his part, Denver felt useful when you needed his help in some way. The day Denver learned that Maggie was leaving for a nursing home, her heart sank. Maggie said that for 2 years now, her children have been calling her constantly, almost every day, urging her to leave the cabin and the land, and she no longer had the strength to deal with this family pressure. As far as Maggie was concerned, she would live until her last day in the cabin she built with Harry, her husband. But in this life, not all our desires can be fulfilled, can they? Said the resigned lady. Denver hugged her friend and replied that she could always count on him if she needed any help. He thanked her for all she had done, giving her a chance to get a taste of dignity and confidence again to try to get out of her homeless situation. It didn't even take 2 weeks and Maggie did go to the nursing home. The family made all the arrangements without even consulting her. They wanted everything to be quick and uncomplicated, avoiding debates and clashing ideas with her. Denver didn't even see Maggie move. He just intuited that she must have already changed because he never saw her in the city again. Every now and then, he still went over to the cabin just to make sure everything was in order, and on one of those rounds, Denver was lucky enough to see Maggie's kids in the cabin. He approached and introduced himself. He asked where his friend was, and the eldest son kicked him out, saying that he would not act like his mother, giving her money for cachaca or financing any other addiction the dying man had. Denver didn't expect this kind of rudeness from the children of a lady as polite as Maggie and was speechless for a second. Somewhat bewildered, he asked again where she was, but in addition to not answering, the children shooed the man away from the property, saying he'd better not show up there anymore or they'd call the police. Denver was feeling sick, but he wasn't going to let that behavior keep him from his friend. Since the kids didn't say which nursing home Maggie was in, he would find out for himself. He went to the town's homeless shelter and asked the caretaker if there was a list of old people's homes he could consult. In this way, he discovered that there were only 4 nursing homes. 2 of them downtown, 1 in a more remote neighborhood, and the 4th was even further away, on the edge of town. But that didn't matter. He would walk as far as it took to find Maggie. He showered at the shelter and left early the next morning. The first 2 nursing homes were close to the shelter it was in, but Maggie wasn't in them. He walked for another 40 minutes and reached the 3rd house. There was a Margareth, but it wasn't her Maggie. So Denver walked for another hour until he reached the main road that would lead to the last nursing home on his list. Denver kept walking. He hitchhiked the entire way, but no one stopped to help him. About 3 hours later, Denver finally spotted the nursing home and headed towards it, already quite tired and thirsty. He wasn't a young man anymore either, after all. As he entered the place, he thought it was now or never. She could only be there. At the reception, he didn't even ask if there was a Margareth there. Confident, he arrived saying he would like to visit Margareth, who had moved a few days ago. The receptionist hesitated for a moment, but confirmed that yes, Margareth was there. Then Denver asked to see her, claiming he was her brother. He had to lie, because he knew that just being a friend wasn't enough for these companies to let him through. They told him visiting hours were almost over, but he could see her quickly. Then they took him to the bedroom and he was speechless at what he saw. Her friend was lying down and looked sick. He had never seen her in such a fragile way. But when Maggie saw that it was Denver at the door, her eyes lit up and she broke into a sincere smile. Denver approached slowly, was still analyzing Maggie's situation, but the old woman was in a hurry. She motioned with her hands for her to come close soon and said, "Don't waste time. I have something to tell you." The man sat down next to her and helped her to a seat. She leaned toward him and whispered something in his ear that made Denver shiver. "Is this serious?" "Is it serious?" he asked, totally in disbelief at what he had heard. Maggie patted his cheek, then squeezed her mother and said, "It is. And yours. And everything inside it is for you too. All." After a while, an employee of the house announced that visiting hours were over and Denver had to leave. He wasn't quite sure what to make of what Maggie had said, but he had been a little sad to see her in such a fragile state. She didn't even look like the same independent, determined old woman she knew. Maybe the change was too recent and she hadn't gotten used to it yet. Before leaving, he looked over his shoulder and saw Maggie smiling. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last time he would see his friend. The next morning, Denver gathered the last of the change he had and bought a simple flower arrangement. He walked all the way back to the nursing home. Arriving there, he discovered that his friend had died that night. He wasn't prepared for that news and it took a while for him to sink in. He cried right there, and the receptionist wanted to know if he had not been warned by his brother, as the family had already been notified during the night. The man didn't answer, just walked away, letting the tears wash his face. Denver walked back toward the cabin that was now his, according to Maggie's last words. Despite that, he didn't look happy. A copy of the key was hidden, in the same place Maggie said, so he had no trouble getting inside. He wanted to be happy with the present, but he couldn't stop thinking about Maggie. At that moment, it was just an empty house. He decided to prepare a coffee, the same way Maggie had prepared it for him other times. He opened the tallest cupboard in the kitchen and looked for the packet of coffee grounds. There was a cardboard box in front of the cafe, and, when trying to remove it, the box fell straight to the floor, making a considerable noise. When she picked it up, she noticed that it was a heavy box, and, therefore, she decided to open it to make sure she hadn't broken anything that belonged to her friend. Seeing what was in the box, Denver was completely breathless. There were many wads of cash there, an amount the man had only seen in movie suitcases. He put everything on the table and stared at it for several minutes, wondering what that meant. There were more than 40 packets of $10,000 each, totaling almost $500,000. A fortune that Denver deduced was a lifetime savings. He remembered that Maggie had confirmed for him that the cabin was his and so was everything inside. Still, he hesitated, but in the end he packed all the bundles into an old, faded leather bag and headed for the door. He knew exactly what to do. Over the next few days, Denver did a modest renovation of the cabin, just enough to make it more eye-catching, without taking away the original features made by Maggie and her husband. He selected the personal items that the former resident had left and arranged them in the environment as if it were a museum exhibit. On the living room wall, he hung a very beautiful picture of Maggie and left a candle burning below. Denver wasn't doing this because of the property she left him or the money he found, but because he wanted to show how much he valued the friendship he had with this lady. It was a matter of days before Maggie's 2 children arrived at the cabin and found Denver inhabiting the place. They asked him what he thought he was doing there, and Denver was honest. He said that he had visited Maggie at the nursing home before her death and that she had left the cabin and everything in it to him. The children thought that Denver, in addition to being homeless, had mental problems. Where has it been seen that a property like that, which belonged to their father and mother, could be given, like this, on a platter, to a homeless man they didn't even know? Denver was sorry they didn't believe her story, but she said it was true, and she was even more sorry that they were both Maggie's children and had no idea what their mother's last wishes were. Hearing this, Maggie's youngest son wanted to go after Denver. The only reason he didn't get to grab him by the collar was because his older brother stopped him, saying that if he touched that gentleman they would lose their minds and that could harm them later. Finally, he said he would solve it in the most civilized way, calling the police. And that's what he did. It didn't take a car with 2 policemen 20 minutes to reach the cabin. Upon learning what was happening, the officers warned Denver that he would need to show some document proving that his version of the story was true. It could be some digital recording, some will, or a letter signed by Maggie. Denver had nothing but her word. In that case, the officers said he would have to leave immediately. The youngest son came forward and stated that even if the homeless man left the house, he had invaded the place and that this could not go unpunished. So I'd like to file a complaint, and so I hope to get that gentleman out of the picture once and for all. Denver was extremely hurt by it all. Children who did not respect their mother's wishes. She couldn't hold back the tears and only asked for a few moments to pack her personal things. Noticing that the cabin was indeed cleaner and in better condition, the eldest son allowed the dying man a few minutes. Denver then took his old blanket that was propped up on a chair and placed it inside the old, faded leather suitcase, covering what was already inside. Before leaving, she took a look at the sanctuary she had prepared for her friend and surrendered herself to the authorities without causing any more trouble. I didn't want to give Maggie's children more ammunition or make her situation worse. Although the scenario was very unfavorable for him, Denver wasn't stupid. He already had a good idea of what to do. Maggie's children had no idea what would happen in the next few weeks. Maggie's youngest son did not drop the charges, and upon arriving at the police station, Denver was not arrested only because he had no criminal record, but was instructed to quickly seek a public attorney to represent him in the case. When he was released, Denver went to the shelter where he spent his nights and spoke to the caretaker. He asked for a referral to a law firm, and the only thing the janitor did was point out an ad in the city service book. Maggie's children wasted no time. They placed a restraining order against Denver to stop him from approaching the cabin and put it up for sale for $84,000. They didn't even bother to remove furniture, decorations, and personal items from inside. Selling the place was a priority. A week passed and a lawyer named Charles Winter contacted Maggie's children. He said he was interested in the property and wanted to know if it was possible to use it as a summer home. The children were not opposed to the idea, but that there were other interested buyers. Then, whoever made the best offer would take the property. Charles wanted to know what the highest bid had been so far. The eldest son revealed that a potential buyer had offered $90,000, which would be paid in 3 different deposits. Charles was silent on the other end of the line for a moment, as if he were calculating or wondering if this auction was really worth it. When he got back to Maggie's kids, he said he was offering $91,000 in cash, full payment, as long as the deal ended as soon as they got off the phone. The 2 sons didn't even have to think about the proposal. They accepted and set the conclusion of the negotiation for 7 days, when they would exchange the money for the key to the property. The 2 children celebrate the sale and announce that they will use the deadline to discard all the trinkets that the former occupant of the cabin had left. Charles, however, says it's not necessary. That if their idea is to get rid of what's in the cabin, that he's willing to pay $1,000 more to have them leave it the way it is. Greedy, Maggie's children then say that the deal would be closed for $92,000 and that nothing would be moved. 7 days after the phone negotiation, Maggie's 2 children went to the cabin to complete the process of selling their parents' house. A luxury sedan parked with 2 occupants. A man between 40 and 50 years old got out of the driver's seat in a suit. He soon introduced himself as attorney Charles Winter. The passenger in the passenger seat remained in the vehicle. After greeting each other, Charles and Maggie's children began the transaction. The lawyer opened the suitcase and showed several wads of cash. Then he handed the suitcase to the youngest of the brothers. He checked the money and nodded to his older brother, who then passed an envelope with documents and the house key. "Congratulations, Charles. This is your new vacation home," he said. But Charles held out his arm with an outstretched hand and said, "Don't congratulate me, gentlemen. The real owner of this admirable hut is not me." Maggie's children looked at each other in surprise, not understanding what was happening. "I'm just a negotiator," Charles said. At that moment, the second occupant of the luxury sedan got out of the car. He also wore a suit, a well-trimmed beard and hair, and shiny, impeccable shoes. Maggie's kids seem to know him from somewhere, but none of them are quite sure. When the man stands right in front of them, Maggie's kids realize it's Denver the homeless. This is the gentleman who is buying the property. All the money in the suitcase is his. Please complete handing over the keys and documents to him, gentlemen. The children don't know what to do. They don't know whether to feel cheated or humiliated, but there was indeed money in the suitcase, and it was the agreed amount. The eldest son sees no alternative but to hand over the key and the envelope, but does so with a look of deep anger. Denver accepts, passes the envelope to Charles, and keeps the key. "You never knew your mother Maggie's true desires," he said. "You did everything you could to get me away from her and what was left of her, but apparently she knew the children she had well and left me the necessary conditions to ensure that her will was done." With the exception of the lawyer, no one understood what was going on and how that homeless man had gotten that money. Little did they know that they were receiving a portion of their mother's money. Now Denver could have the cabin legally. "I will live in this cabin and respect everything Maggie and her father have built. See you in court. Use this money to pay a good lawyer in the lawsuit you brought against me. You're going to need it," Denver said. "Now get off my property or I'll have to call the police." With those words, Denver left Maggie's kids behind and closed the cabin door behind him. He relit the candle below Maggie's picture and that night had a peaceful, restorative sleep in his new home. If you liked the story, please leave a like, and this other video that is appearing on the screen now will probably make you emotional too. Good session, and until the next video.